Welcome to Fairy Tale Friday, episode 4. We'll pick up where we left off. Now the girls are just leaving the tower, about to embark on a journey or an adventure to find Vampire Night School. Vampires have existed alongside humans, elves, pixies, and all manner of creatures since time immemorial. But, like most non-humans, they did tend to keep to themselves, regardless or perhaps still unsure of the growing equality coexistent movement. This is not to say that they were truly ostracized or unwelcome in Lonstassian towns or cities. Vampires are among some of the most talented musicians in all of the realms. No, vampires were simply, like the wares, regarded with a certain and not unwarranted sense of apprehension, perhaps a lot of apprehension. Now, this was most likely due to the large number of folk tales and fictitious stories that cast both species in the darkest of lights. Not that they were tame, mind you, but in essence, both vampires and werewolves are much like anyone else most days or nights, as the case may be. Legend as old as the hills stated that vampires and werewolves had both evolved from the fairy folk of old, not to be confused with fairies. The fairy folk of old were a completely different set of beings, powerful, mysterious, almost myth now. Fairies, well, fairies are becoming so mainstream that they had recently unionized, although a fairy godmother is still a rare honor. And it would not be wise to refer to fairies as mainstream, as an angry fairy is truly something to fear. But as to the theory of origin for both vampires and werewolves, it was largely unsubstantiated, and they both rejected the association. One of the biggest differences between a human and a vampire: sun. It's the most significant. Exposure to sunlight burned vampires from the inside out. It's believed that it started in the blood. Once started, the combustion was impossible to stop. The vampires turned to a pile of ash. Fairies, witches, and sorcerers had been working for an answer for centuries, but all efforts had proven ineffective. Not that vampires were inclined to offer themselves for research. For this reason, vampires tend to keep their daytime resting place secret, but at night they could be anywhere, and you could be sure a great many of them could be found at school. Vampire school, of course, could only be held at night, preferably outdoors, weather permitting. Cece hadn't known that a vampire school existed in the Lonesome Forest until she overheard a touring crone discuss it with a witch. Garden variety, not wicked, she hoped. Cece was very curious. Vampires were said to be exceptionally attractive beings, and having never met one herself, Cece was excited to decide for herself. As she brushed a stray curl off her face, she turned back to observe how her friends were faring. Sasha was typically apprehensive. This Cece had expected, but Radiance seemed more alive than ever. Just as Cece began to silently congratulate herself on a most successful adventure, she collided with something very, very hard and fell on her bottom very, very hard. What are 3 human children doing in the Lonstassian forest at night? A dark and melodic voice questioned. Upon inspection, the wall was in fact an incredibly handsome and very pale young man. 6 feet tall, with long dark hair pulled back at the neck, beautiful bottomless dark eyes that were set beneath arched brows, and a perfect nose. For a moment, he made Cece forget all about Prince Leonardo Charming, but only for a moment. He wore an exquisitely embroidered coat with ruffled white sleeves and really fantastic boots. Fantastic boots. No sword hung at his side, but he didn't need one. Now, a gentleman would have helped by extending his hand after knocking a lady down, at the very least. But this was no gentleman. This was a vampire. At this realization, Cece discovered that she was not nearly as nonchalant as she had made out. She was at a loss for words. So she said the only thing she could think of: "I'm a lady, not a child." What are three human ladies doing in the lonesome forest at night? He asked again in the same melodic yet somewhat bored voice. Flustered, Cece extended her own hand to the vampire, which of course he ignored. "So even for a vampire," Cece began, before Sasha rushed forward. Sasha reached down to help Cece up and turned to the bored vampire. "Hello, my name is Sasha. This is Cece, and this," she indicated her tall blonde friend, "is Radiance. We mean no offense. We simply..." She trailed off as she noticed that his gaze was held firmly by Radiance. Radiance gazed back at him. She had never met a man before. And truly the vampire was unlike any man she had met, anyone in Torin. He was elegant, he was beautiful, he was lethal. Sasha grew quite nervous as she realized how very alone they were in the dark forest, and how silently the vampire was regarding her very innocent friend. As she glanced at Cece's pale face, she felt her own fear rise. "We need to return to the town. It's very late, and people will start looking for us almost immediately. Right, Cece?" She turned to her friend, who nodded back very furiously. "Oh yes, there will be a search party any minute. Lots of people, very loud, with torches. We have to go. Nice meeting you and all." The vampire ignored both girls. He stepped forward and took Radiance's slender hand in his. He brought it to his lips. "I am called Manuel. I guard the entrance to the School of Night, and am honored to have met you." Sasha rushed forward. "We're honored to have met you as well. We're sorry to have disturbed you, but we do need to leave." Trying to remove Radiance's hand from the vampires was like attempting to move a statue. He ran her wrist under his nose. He stood incredibly still. He inhaled again, his eyes never leaving Radiance. "Cece, we need help," Sasha whispered. "So, my father represents a number of the very best performers from across Lonstus. If you let us leave, without eating us, I'll put in a good word for anyone you want, and we can work out a percentage or something even. We're kind of important. Big deals and all," Cece babbled. Apparently meeting a real vampire was in fact nothing like her fantasies. Nothing. "Call off your dog," Manuel drawled. "Excuse me?" Sasha was convinced that she had misheard. She had never owned a dog, let alone brought one into the forest with her. Her heart pounded furiously in her chest. She hoped the vampire didn't hear. But the small smile on his lips as she glanced up at him assured her that he did. "Your dog. Sent him home. I hate dogs." He smiled again, this time at the shy Radiance. A vampire, alone in a dark forest, was bad enough. Sasha did not know how to handle a disturbed one. In terror, she glanced at Cece, who silently shook her head. Sasha knew almost nothing of vampires, aside from the general lore. And although known as some of the best performers in the land, vampires did not often mix with humans. Manuel sniffed the air at once. "I see." His eyes flashed in what looked like arrogance. Radiance reclaimed her hand and turned to her friends. "There's no need for alarm. Manuel would not hurt us, would you?" She turned back to him in complete innocence. Radiance, who had never met anyone, least of all a vampire. How could she know what to expect? She didn't even know what a vampire was. Manuel addressed the forest. "These human girls will be my responsibility for the remainder of the evening. This I pledge on the honor of my forebears." The evening was unfolding in a far different manner than Cece had expected. Manuel took Radiance's arm in his, and he began escorting her back through the forest. Confusion apparent on their faces, Cece and Sasha started in behind. Silently they followed Radiance, the beautiful vampire home, listening carefully as he pointed out different spots of interest to their lovely friend. The lonesome forest is a dangerous place at the best of time for human children. What would bring you out at night? I shall escort you home myself. Now, Radiance, It is a very unusual name. Sasha and Cece, he ignored completely. The vampire had stated his intentions, and unless he wanted to declare a duel he may or may not win, he had no choice but to retreat. He had protected them for as long as he had been able. They were now the responsibility of the vampire. If they were harmed in any way, a duel would be called, and blood would be shed. But he doubted that the vampire would purposefully destroy the peace their two people had held for the past 2 centuries. Having done all that he could, the young werewolf started his run home. Crawling up the olive tree outside her bedroom, Sasha silently crept back to her room and changed into her silky powder blue pajamas and crawled into her bed. Bliss. Upon reflection, Sasha had to admit that it had been an exhilarating evening. Not only had they broken radiance out of her tower, Cece had fulfilled her dream of styling her impossibly long hair, and they had met a vampire, an actual vampire. Leisurely, he had walked Radiance home, quietly speaking with her all the way. The pace had picked up considerably as he led Sasha and Cece to the edge of the forest. In silence, he had disappeared to the night when Sasha had turned to thank him. Apparently, manners were not his strong suit, but he hadn't eaten them, so Sasha felt that this was a win. She supposed that she would never see him again. He didn't seem interested in either herself or Cece. This did not bother her. He did not seem friendly in the least not to them. His demeanor had changed when interacting with Radiance. Sasha felt vaguely nervous at this memory. As the morning rays woke Radiance from her slumber, she knew her world had changed. For the first time in her nearly 17 years, she felt alive. She rose from her bed with more than the need to imitate life. She felt a part of it. Something caught her eye on the windowsill of her lonely tower room. A rose. A single rose. A rose the same shade as her lips. Perfect it was on the stone sill, so vibrantly alive against the stone. She knew it had not been there when she fell asleep. Thank you so much. I will see you later. Bye-bye.